Okay, hello everyone. Uh, Now we can start, I think. So this is week 4, right? For your course Networks and Communications. So if you have any question from the previous week or from previous lectures, you can ask any question about networks and communication, especially internet. Is it a difficult course so far? Not that much, right? I hope. Okay. So far we have discussed what is an internet and especially layer architecture, right? So we were talking about application layer in the last week. So in this week we would also discuss some application of application layers. So if you have any question, you can ask. Okay. So layered internet protocol stack is simply application layer, right? If we go from top to bottom, then we have transport layer, network layer, link layer, and physical layer, right? And we discuss what is the functionality of application layer, and obviously at the host and at the destination, both layers of the same, like if application, some data is related to application layer at the host, it will be obviously handled by application layer at the destination end as well, just like airplane or airports, right? So, and there are so many protocols at each layer, especially in the last week we talked about HTTP, right? All the web surfing that we are doing is through HTTP, right? So when you write something www.facebook.com, so browser knows that you are going to use HTTP protocol. Okay. Today we will discuss SMTP protocol and DNS and IMAP as well. Then after the application layer, we have transport layer, and basically it's a process to process data transfer, and the famous protocol is TCP because it's secure, it's reliable. We talked about this TCP and UDP thing, but in the next week we will discuss TCP and UDP in more detail. Okay, so why we are discussing these type of protocols and layers? Because when you have to make some application that would be using some internet, then you have to design and define, like in each layer, which protocol you would be using. Okay, and obviously it depends on your application. So that's why we are discussing different protocols. At least you have some good idea about these protocols, because if some solution, like if you are launching some internet based application, it could be web based, it could be Android or iOS mobile application. So you should know that, okay, what we can do at transport layer. Okay, what are the hurdles at network layer or transport layer, or even link or physical layers. Okay, so after transport layer we have network layer and routing of datagrams from source to destination. So if I want to send data from NUIG network to some other network, let's suppose to the Google headquarters or Google server, then this type of routing would be handled by network layer. Okay, because routers, and we discussed this thing like routing and forwarding thing, but don't worry, in 2-3 weeks we would be discussing this network layer as well, okay, in more detail, just like application layer. So IP is a famous protocol. Internet use this protocol IP. Okay, and then routing protocols are there, and then link layer is there, data transfer between neighboring network elements, hop to hop. Okay, so if I want to send data from this computer to the switch or to this laptop, this is hop to hop. Okay, and obviously it's very easy, we can directly communicate with each other Like just like if you want to transfer your data at home, you can use your Wi-Fi, or even very basic one, the Bluetooth one, right? So it's a one-to-one link. So within a network, or from this laptop to the next laptop, which is connected to this laptop, we will use link layer, okay? And for link layer, we have different protocols, RFCs. For example, Ethernet is very famous all over the world. All the LANs, local area networks, use this Ethernet RFC, okay? And in this course, we will discuss how Ethernet works, and when we send data, what is broadcasting, okay? And why, if I am sending this data to this laptop, why all not laptops are reading my data, okay? They can read, okay? I told you that over the LAN, it's some sort of broadcasting, okay? This switch will broadcast your message to all PCs that are connected to this switch or this Wi-Fi router, okay? Broadcast. Clear? What is broadcasting? Just like a TV transmission. They broadcast their transmission. Anyone can catch and see channel if they are registered to that particular channel, right? So, but same is the case with switch or LAN or Ethernet topology thing, that data would be broadcasted over the LAN, and only, but obviously data will contain, okay, what is the MAC address of that particular PC. Do you know what is a MAC address? Every computer has a network card, and every network card has a unique value, unique address, okay? So like if you are using Mac or if you are using Windows, you can just type ipconfig and it will tell you your MAC address. What is the MAC address? It is a unique key, it is a unique identifier that is assigned to your network card, which is installed on your computer, okay? It's a hardware, network card is a hardware, which is part of this laptop or even this desktop machine, right? Or even all screens having Wi-Fi connectivity. They have a network card, and all over the world, this network card, or there would be only one MAC address of this machine, okay? So when this switch would be forwarding your data, it will contain the MAC address of your machine. So that's why your network card only will read that data. Okay, this is for me, and it will pick from the LAN, okay? So in simplicity, the LAN is just a common sort of a pipe in which data is just broadcasting. Anyone can pick, even I can read your data that is transferring over the LAN, local area network, okay? And obviously if it's not encrypted, I can easily find out your usernames and passwords and all the stuff. If you are connected to NUIG network, I can simply read all the data that is going on over the NUIG internet, okay? Local area network. But in most cases, your data is encrypted, right? So I cannot decrypt that data. But like before 5-10 years, it was very easy. I remember when I was student, like in a lab, we can easily hack someone's Facebook account very easily. It's a session hijacking technically. So let's suppose if he is using Facebook, I can easily open his Facebook on my laptop. It was possible 10 years ago, not 10 years ago, but yeah, so 7-8 years ago. So, but then they changed this session management thing so that no one can hijack your session, okay? So it is possible, it was possible, and even it is possible if you are not making such applications which are considering this encryption and decryption of data. That's why security, network security is very important, okay? Because you are using shared resources, right? There are no dedicated resources for you. So if you are using shared resources, anyone can read your data. So that's why encryption is very important. So in this course, we will be discussing different types of network security protocols, and but most probably by the end of 8-9 week, right? So this is link layer, and then obviously we have finally physical layer, bits on the wire. So it contains coaxial cables, optical fibers, and all other stuff. So physical, your machine, right? So these are the different layers of Internet Protocol stack. Then we discussed in the last week that web and HTTP. So basically web pages consist of objects. We discussed this thing. If I have to open one page and it contains 10 images, it means that all of these 10 images would be stored in a HTML skeleton. All the websites, even advanced websites using different languages, programming languages, they have to use HTML because HTML provides you a basic skeleton of a web page, okay? And it's very, very easy. Hardly, I think 10 or 20 tags are there and you can make a very good website by yourself, okay? So they are very, very easy, no case sensitivity thing, and they don't mind, they don't need compiler. So you can say that web browser is a compiler for HTML. So these objects, so basically in HTTP, you are requesting these objects to the web server, okay? And I told you web server is just like a simple machine, but obviously having very strong computing and storage capabilities. And they are simply storing files of HTML or some other files, PDF, images. All the files are stored just like the files that you stored on your computer, okay? In a folder, you can simply put different images. So when you are requesting some file, so technically just in short, in simplicity, you are just saying that, okay, give me this file of this folder, okay? And they have to send this file and the relevant attached files, all images that are using in that file, okay? So we call this thing as object. So web page consists of objects, each of which can be stored on different web servers. And object can be HTML file, it could be JPEG or PNG images or Java applets or audio or even video files, okay? So for example, when we are requesting NUIG or NUI Galway.ie BIS logo.gif, it means that this is a path name, that on this server host name there is a folder BIS, and this folder contains one image named as logo.gif. So I'm just requesting that image, okay? So my browser is just requesting that thing. So this request will go to NUI Galway web server and full path name, and then it will pick that image, convert that image into frames, shorter parts, divide it, send that back to the request person, right? So HTTP is web's application layer protocol. It's a client server model, obviously, and browser is representing or working as a client, right? And server is your any web server. It could be Google, it could be Facebook web server, right? And so yeah, simple HTTP request, and then when it will receive HTTP request, if this request is valid in terms of that particular file exists at that particular server, okay? So if this is valid, then it will send response, okay? And even if it's not valid, it will send some error as a response. We discussed there are different 404 or different errors, file not found, right? So same is the case with your iPhone running Safari browser, okay? And then we discussed this thing. There are two types of HTTP connections, non-persistent HTTP and persistent HTTP. Like from names, we can analyze very easily that persistent means your connection has longer life to connect and you can ask multiple things from the server. But obviously it's just like a telephone call that you are making to someone, and then if you're not talking but you're still holding or resources, reserving the resources, right? So most of the connections are non-persistent HTTP thing. and that you only open one TCP connection. HTTP uses TCP at the lower transport layer, okay? And at most one object can be sent over TCP connection, and then TCP connection would be closed in non-persistent HTTP. But in persistent HTTP, obviously you can ask multiple objects and server can wait for you, and then after that this TCP connection would be closed. But obviously persistent HTTP wouldn't be liked by any web server because it will reserve their resources, because every web server has some capacity. For example, they can only handle 1000 requests per minute or per second. It depends on the capacity, right? Like obviously, you know that the load on Google server for simple search and the load on NUI Galway web server would be much different, right? Because all over the world people are requesting different type of searches on Google, but obviously NUI Galway web server wouldn't have that much load, okay? So, but that's why you have to configure its different configuration so that they are capable of handling 1 million connections per minute or 10,000 connections per minute, simultaneous connections, okay, at a time. So this is simple HTTP request message header. Remember we talked about this thing that at the top your data would be divided and every layer would add its header information, right? So this header information would be used by the same layer at the destination, right? So this header information would be useful for the application which would be running at the destination machine or right server. So this is HTTP request message, and in which you have to simply have to tell which method you are going to use. There we discussed this thing. There are a few methods: post method, get method, right, and even delete method are there, right? And we are just asking this method is get and then getting this file by using this protocol 1.1, and then we are adding header information about ourselves. This is host where we are sending HTTP request, okay? And then we discuss this post method and get method, okay? And head method is there, and even put method is there. So in post method we are posting some data. Whenever you are using forms, whenever you are filling forms, sign in or sign up or registration, any type of forms which contains text boxes or radio buttons or check boxes, these are the form, HTML form. This is a HTML form. Technically you are submitting data to the server, so your method would be post always, okay? Your method would be post because you are posting some data to the web server, okay? And by telling this that you are using post method, web server would be ready. Okay, it will contain some data in forms, it will contain some data in different text fields. I have to catch this data, store this data, or process this data, okay? So then we have head method and put methods, so we can put or upload files, different things. So HTTP response message, most of the time you get 200 number message, which is okay message. It means that your requested page is there at the web page, okay? But there are some other status codes, right? If there is 301, it means that particular file was there in the past, but now it's moved to somewhere else, okay? So and most of the time you know that 404 not found error, right? So this is very common, 404, okay? Even this 404 thing was invented in Ireland in yeah, so one person used this thing, and when he didn't get that file, he sent it 404 and then all over the world it was code for telling someone that you didn't get that file. Okay, so we tried this thing that we can simply run this command over the terminal on Mac, or even you can use telnet on Windows operating system as well. You can ping different servers, and we also discussed this port number, right? Is it clear, right? Port number, every process has some virtual number. That's why your data sent to the Skype will go to only Skype, not on WhatsApp application, because every application would be running at some virtual port number on your computer. Every process has one or more, they can use, Skype can use multiple ports, but they have to bound, when they would be starting, it will bound to some port. Sometimes these ports are fixed, but sometimes they say operating system, okay, give us any available port. And if you try to run your application on same port that is already reserved by some other process, there would be an error. Okay, so most of the time your web servers are running on port 80 or 8080. Okay, and this your web browser knows that by default. That's why facebook.com, you didn't write facebook.com:80. Okay, because your web browser knows that if you are not adding port number, it means that the web server on Facebook would be running at port number 80. Okay, but if your web browser, if your web server is running on some other port, 8001, 9001, or it could be 64,000 something, because we have more or less 65,000 virtual ports available in every computer. So we have to mention it. Then we have to mention it. Okay, so if some browser, if some web server is not running on port 80, it will not be simply accessible by simply writing facebook.com. Then you have to mention its exact port number. Okay, then you have to mention facebook.com colon let's say 8001 or 8002. Okay, so this is HTTP thing that we discussed in the last week as well. And then for maintaining some sort of sessions or persistency, we also discussed about cookies, right? And you know that because of EU laws, it's like you every time, in most of the time, not every time, but in most of the time, you have to accept or reject cookies, right? Whenever you are surfing something, especially the websites that would be served first time on your computer, they will ask for accepting this thing. Okay, and obviously they are taking information about your computers, they are storing different type of information, and if you say accept all, they can take any data from you. Okay, because you have accepted. So obviously we don't have time to read all details, or but yeah, so we discussed this thing that nothing is free in this world. You have already paying something in terms of using some free services of these Google or Facebook. Okay, so so there are 4 components of cookies. Like we have header, then obviously this cookie header line in next HTTP request message, and obviously there would be one file which would be stored on my computer. Okay, and next time they will read that file, because technically there is no because of security concern, it is not possible for a web browser to read any file on your computer until and unless you explicitly allow them. Okay, so so yeah, so that's why browser can read, because you have allowed you have accepted that cookies thing. Okay, then obviously they would be storing at backend database at website, and they would be sharing that data. Might be airline company would be sharing your data to some hotel chain, so that you have searched, okay, I'm going to from Dublin to, let's suppose, Athens. So all the hotels in Athens will know that, okay, this person is coming. So just send him ads about hotel reservations or hotel deals, or even some other deals that are relevant to this person in Athens. Okay, so that's why they purchase data. Okay, so it's not free. It's not free for you. It's not even free for companies. Google will sell your data to anyone, to NASA, to CIA, to any agencies. They are free to sell your data. Okay, and they can track you. They can send your preferences. They can send your weaknesses and other things, or you're searching different activities, you're searching details, histories, right? So they are sharing, companies are sharing, they are purchasing. Similarly, same is the case with Facebook. They openly say that, like, they sell your data to different marketing companies, and marketing companies use that. Okay, for Galway people, for Galway students of age, let's suppose 18 to 22, what would be the best packages for different things. Okay, so they analyze on this basis. So okay, so we discussed this example. So for example, this client has only one cookie, which was made by eBay. So might be because eBay or Amazon or Alibaba, they are competitors. They most probably they wouldn't be sharing data with each other. Okay, but they know that, okay, but at least they can know that, okay, this person has searched something on eBay. Okay, this person, so might be Amazon, somehow they can find on your computer that you have searched 100 times on eBay and 10 times on Amazon, supposed to be, because they know how many times you have searched on Amazon, but they don't know eBay thing, right? But they can purchase this data some sort of from Google. Okay, how many times you search Google and for eBay different products, or might be there are cookies which are not stored in right. So in terms of security, they are not more secure. So they can get some sort of idea. Okay, this person is more inclined towards purchasing products from eBay. Okay, let him or her offer us some good offer so that they can transfer from eBay to Amazon. Okay, so cookies and this will work. So same is the case for eBay. They can see how many people are going to Amazon, not going to eBay. And if they know that, okay, this particular person has particular interest, then obviously they can recommend different products on ads. They can offer special offers based on the interest. And I told you that finding recommendation is very, very easy. You know that 7 billion people are there, and they have very common characteristics. Okay, how many categories you can divide these 7 billion people? Any guess? About characteristics, about interest, their interest, right? Their surfing history. I think in 20 categories, in 40 categories maximum, in 50 categories, right? Because even in a class, I can find many students who have more or less same interest of different hobbies or different things which are like common to me, 80 to 90%, right? So this recommendation systems are very strong because they can profile clients. So if I can make a profile of 20 different categories, and I know that, okay, this person belongs to this category, then I know that, okay, this category people are purchasing this sort of thing. Okay, so I can simply offer him as well, and 80% chance is there he will also buy this thing, right? So this is profiling. So in businesses, they are doing profiling in terms of different things, in terms of interest, and then they can recommend. And remember, they have data. They have a lot of your data from Twitter, from social media, your interests. So they can combine and they can track your all preferences, and on the basis of similar users, they can easily suggest you or recommend you different things. That's why most of the time we get ads that are very relevant to us. We don't know how is it possible that I was discussing something with my friend in some other city, and then I open my laptop and I'm getting same ad on my computer. So this is some sort of based on profiling, okay? And this cookies and all other thing is helping to make customers profiling. So simply it will set another cookie on the client machine, and then it will be stored at backend database of Amazon as well. And even after 1 week later, they would know that, okay, on based of your cookies, they can suggest you different things, or they can provide you much better offers. Okay. Any question? Okay. So in the last week, I discussed this thing that, for example, all of us know that this is, for example, institutional network, for example, NUIG, right? And it contains 10,000 nodes, 10,000 laptops or different systems that are connected to this system, right? And this is a external router to connect NUIG to the internet world, right? And NUIG would be providing some cost of this internet. Can anyone tell of which link they would be providing? Can anyone tell if this is NUIG network? This is an external router that would be connecting to some ISP router, okay, this one. So NUIG would be providing some cost, or it will be billing something of which link? Can anyone tell? Obviously NUIG would be paying to someone, or no? Paying to the ISP, right? So which link, on the basis of which link? You know that even at home basis, you know, we know that now it's unlimited bandwidth thing. We can download or upload unlimited, but it was not same 10 years ago, right? If your connection is 5 GB capacity, after 5 GB you would have to pay more. Right now it's unlimited download thing, but 5-10 years ago, if you have a connection at your home, it has some capacity to download in a month. Let's say 5 GB. Even on your mobile phone, how many of you have some internet package on your mobile phone? Is it unlimited? Is it unlimited, or it has some capacity, 10 GB or 5 GB package? Or you can, even on your mobile phones, you can get, okay, in €5 you can get 5 GB package, right? So what is this 5 GB? It means that you can send or receive, usually it's download capacity, because we are uploading very small data, but we are downloading a lot of data, right? Because when we are watching YouTube or Netflix videos, obviously data is downloading to our system. So in most of the time, that 5 GB package is your download capacity. So what does it mean? That if you go beyond 5 GB, you have to pay more, right? So same is the case with NUIG link, and link is this one, this red arrow, this link. For NUIG, this sort of links are now free because they have spent money to build infrastructure, okay? They have spent a lot of money to obviously create local area network, but it's not costing more. Now it's fixed, right? Once they have been set up. But every month they have to pay about this link. Okay, so for example, if in a 1 month 10 GB data was downloaded, which is very small, but let's say 10 GB data was used by NUIG students when they were using NUIG network. So NUIG will pay cost of 10 GB to this ISP. Okay, and if instead of 10 GB it's 20 GB, obviously cost would be doubled or cost would be increased definitely, right? So it means that this link is expensive for NUIG. If people are downloading so much data, then they have to pay more, and obviously for less they have to pay less, right? So what is the solution if, so question from the last week, for example, somehow NUIG knows that that 5,000 machines at, for example, if I can write, okay, so for example there are 5,000 machines, okay, that are connected to this network, and they are interested in 1 GB file. Okay, it could be video file, but they know that, for example, it would be a live streaming of some football match, and they know that at least 5,000 students would be watching this match on their laptop or on their screen. What does it mean that? This link requires at least they have to download 5,000 GB data. Right or wrong? Right? If one file is, it could be video file, it could be any streaming, but in simplicity we are saying one file. And we know that 5,000 people would be downloading that file at 8 PM tomorrow, let's say. So it means that NUIG would have to pay cost of this downloading 5,000 GB data, which is quite expensive. And obviously they also require some more bandwidth link. Otherwise there would be congestion as well, because at a time when 5,000 people would be trying to get 1 GB data, obviously congestion is there. It could be slow. So what is the solution? And instead of NUIG, you can also think about your ISP provider at your home. And obviously this is home 1, this is home 2, right? This is home 3. And this is ISP main router, which is connected to another regional ISP. And they are paying to regional ISP. Okay. So you can think of just like ISP in terms of ISP, or in terms of institutional network and NUIG. So what is the solution? What is the best solution? What do you think? It is a problem, right? And obviously in terms of scalability, you also doesn't know, might be we are estimating 5 people and 5,000 people, and then actual number of people were 10,000. Okay, right? So it means that cost would be keep increasing with number of users. One problem is there. Second problem is that you need this access link should have more capacity, bandwidth. And obviously we cannot set up again and again different optical fibers or some other links, right? So what could be the solution? Take 1 minute and just think, what could be the solution? Same file that would be downloaded 5,000 times over the same network, and if it's requested, and we know that HTTP request is separate for each user, right? We cannot merge two HTTP requests to Google server, right? So what could be the solution? And one solution is obviously expensive, one that I can increase its capacity, but obviously it's not cheap, right? Cheap solution, it's expensive one. And still we have scalability issue because we don't know how many users will be getting this file or requesting this file. Any solution? What we can do? Because in your exam, questions would be this. This would be your one question. This is a problem over the internet. You have to suggest solution. Okay?
Could you have servers on premise and then you would use the origin servers?
Which server?
Could you have them on premise and then you would use rather than connecting to the public internet, connecting to the local server?
Okay. But that servers, obviously we cannot ask Netflix people to install their servers at NGOIG, but you are very close to the solution. You are in the right direction. So obviously I cannot ask Google, Facebook, Twitter to install their servers on my computer or on my network so that I can quickly get data, right? There are thousands of different streaming servers out there, but idea is very similar to that. So did you get what he is saying? Right? He's saying just stole one server from here and put here. Okay? But obviously someone else? So in your exam questions or even assignments, usually I don't give on a question like what is this, explain this thing. Anything you can find on the book or internet, I will not ask my students to tell me. Okay? So use your computer as a processor, not as some memory storage thing. Okay? You know, in computers, RAM, you know RAM, right? So use your computer, use your brains as a RAM, not as a hard disk to save something. If I can find some data on books or on the internet, I don't think so there is a need to store that data in our brain as well. Okay? But obviously in our brain we can process that data and we can find some better solutions. So questions would be something very similar to this one, that I would be proposing some solution and would be asking that, is there any problem in this solution? If it is, you have to explain it. Okay? So, sorry.
But do we need the book to study for the test or the slides or no?
I think slides are more than enough, right? And if you can go through this lecture again, that would be helping, or if you are taking note, that would be helping. And
are these recorded, the lectures?
Sorry?
The lectures are not recorded?
Yeah, they are recorded.
They are? Oh.
Yeah, they are available on Blackboard. Okay. Okay. So obviously buying a faster access link is not a good solution. It's very expensive and it's not scalable. So other solution is install a web cache. Okay. So very similar to his solution, that we can install a local, some sort of web cache here. It's a local web server which would be storing famous or popular videos and files locally. Okay. So for example, there is a file one request So for example, this computer is requesting this file. This request firstly will go to this cache, web cache. Okay, we can also call this as a proxy server as well. Okay, same name you can use. So web caches or proxy servers, they are same. So this proxy server or web cache will see this particular file is available locally or no. If it's not, then simply it will get there, it will go here, and it will go there. Okay, but if there is another person simultaneously asking again file 1, then this web cache will know that okay, this file is some sort of popular, so many people are asking again and again, right? So they will store file 1 here. Now your traffic wouldn't go there. So basically you are saving money because of this server, right? Because now if 5,000 people are requesting this file, all the requests would be fulfilled by this local web server, not this one. So you are not going to. So there are so many examples and benefits. Like if you are streaming, I know there when I was working in one ISP, what they were doing is that they were simply downloading different football matches, and then they are streaming back to the users. For you, they were charging full price, but by using this web cache or proxy servers, they are only requesting one request. And obviously it's a benefit is more for client as well, because communication time from this computer to this local web cache is very, very fast as compared to going all over the internet, right? So if you are getting your video very fast, then it doesn't matter for you that it's coming from this room or it's coming from Google actual server, right? So in ISPs, they do install different proxy servers, and like they know that these 100 videos or these 10,000 100 videos are very famous on YouTube. So they will download all 1,000 videos locally, and they will stream whenever there is a request about this video. Okay. Obviously, there is a cost of installing local proxy servers. Hardware cost is there, but it's a almost one-time cost. Okay, and hello. So by this way, we can simply reduce cost. So cost is reduced and time is also reduced, right? Because this copy of particular file is available locally. So goal is to satisfy client requests without involving origin server. Okay, and user configures browser to point to a local web cache. So we discussed this thing that first time this would happen, but this file would be stored on web cache, and if the second client requests same file, then this web cache will provide that particular file. Okay, so they are very useful. Web caches are very useful, also known as proxy servers. They can configure different settings for you, and every institutional sort of thing do have these proxy servers. Like if I want to block some website, it's very easy to block, right? Because all the requests would be going through this server, proxy server. I can say that, okay, this sort of Facebook is not allowed at NUIG from, let's say, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. supposed to be, right? So it is very easy to implement different security policies. You can block different websites by using web cache. So obviously when proxy servers is caching some file, they would add some time to refresh that file. But if it's not changing, because if you have uploaded some file on YouTube, there is obviously, it could be deleted, but obviously you cannot edit much that file, right? So we can add simple time that, okay, I am storing on cache this file for 1 month or 10 days or 10 minutes or 10 hours, right? So it will reduce traffic on an institution's access link, and there are so many caches over the internet. So we can take a break here. If you have any question about proxy servers. So another important service at application layer is email service, right? Can anyone tell how this email services run, like when you are using Gmail or even NUI web server? Would that email service and surfing Facebook would be same, or it's different? Can anyone tell? Like if I am using or writing facebook.com on the web browser, or if I am checking my email over the Gmail, right? So both are same, or they would have some different methods behind the network? Any idea? Any guess? Okay. But obviously, when you are accessing Gmail server, technically you are asking for HTTP request for web page to display their home page so that you can enter your username and password, right? So, but for email, we have some different protocol is there, okay, which is known as SMTP, right? So we will discuss this protocol, but SMTP uses HTTP on top of it, okay? So we can say that on application layer, we are using two protocols to send emails. HTTP for simple authentication and for simple web page access of Google or NUI Galway web server. But how web mail servers are working, they use different protocol named as SMTP to send emails to other email servers, okay? So just like web servers, we have email servers as well, which can store emails of all of their users. Okay, so email, there are three major components. User agents, simply we can say that client who is sending some email. So right now we are only concerned about sending an email. Then for retrieving an email, we require another protocol known as POP3 or IMAP, okay? So for sending an email, you need SMTP protocol, simple mail transfer protocol. And for retrieving your email, you use another protocol. It could be POP3 or it could be IMAP, okay? So there are three major components to send an email: user agents, then we require mail servers, and then obviously to communicate with mail servers, we require one protocol named as SMTP. So every mail server, so every mail server basically has some outgoing message queue, and obviously it has some sort of mailbox for every user. That's why if you send some email to someone, it will store on their mailbox, okay? So for example, if jamal.nasir@nuigalway.ie is sending some email to the user who is using Gmail web server, then it is the responsibility of Gmail mail server to store that particular email for that particular user, okay, in the mailbox. So user agent is simple mail reader, And the purpose of user agent is simply composing, editing, or reading mail messages, just like Outlook, okay, or iPhone mail client. So outgoing, incoming messages stored on server, this mail server. So basically this is a queue for outgoing messages. It will send to different servers, okay, and they would be communicating with each other by using SMTP protocol. They are not using HTTP protocol. Me as a user agent would be communicating with this mail server via HTTP, but most of the time communication would be via SMTP protocol, okay. So mail servers contains mailbox which contains incoming messages for user. For each user they would have some mailbox, message queue for outgoing messages that would be sent to other mail servers. So SMTP protocol between mail servers to send email messages, client sending mail server, or server obviously they would be receiving mail server. So SMTP RFC or protocol number is 5321 uses TCP to reliably transfer email messages. Can anyone tell why we are using TCP for SMTP? Why not UDP? SMTP is on the application layer, then on transport layer we are using TCP. So can anyone tell why we are using TCP? Why not UDP? For transferring or sending emails. Any guess? No?
It's reliable.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. Because you don't want to lose your emails, that you cannot say, no, sir, I sent an email, but obviously it would be lost. It could be lost if you are using UDP. TCP is reliable, okay? Whenever you want your data to ensure that your data should reach to the destination with some probability, obviously 99.99%, but so that's why we are using TCP, okay? So for reliability, we use TCP. If we have no concern about reliability, then we can just throw data over the internet by using UDP data. UDP protocol, it would be fast. It would be transferred very quickly as compared to TCP. So you can see here, we have to initiate TCP connection. This client server, as client would be connecting or initiating a TCP connection, and then TCP connection would be initiated. Okay. So RTT is round trip time. Okay. So round trip time is when you are sending this data and when you are getting its response. This total time is RTT. Okay. So round trip time from server back to server. And then obviously there would be 3 phases of transfer. It will simply, there would be one handshaking, SMTP and handshaking. It will send one code 220, right? And then client would say hello, and then it will again say 250 hello. So they both be ensure that like this handshaking have been done. Okay. So it just sort of acknowledgements, because in TCP we have to acknowledge. I will send some data and then I will ask that have you received this data? I will get that acknowledgement. Sometimes it will happen that data have been received but that acknowledgement is lost. So then it will resend that data, and then the destination will say no, I have that data, my acknowledgement was lost only, right? So then SMTP would transfer mail to the SMTP server, and then SMTP closure would be there. So it's very easy. You only have to send few commands in ASCII task, right? So for example, there is one scenario suppose Ashling sends email to John. So obviously Ashling is using user agent to compose email message to John at nuigalway.ie. So we are assuming Ashling's mail server is different. It could be Gmail or it could be something else. And this is NUI mail server, okay? So in the second step, obviously it will compose in the first step. Then user agent send message to her mail server using SMTP, okay? And message placed in message queues, this green one. So they have hundreds or thousands of messages in a queue, and obviously most of the time they would send messages on first come first serve basis, but they can prioritize different messages based on some other things, okay? So in the third step, client side of SMTP at mail server opens TCP connection with John's mail server, okay, with this one, because at the email address she would be mentioning that john@nuigalway.ie. So this server will know that, okay, there is a one server, SMTP server by default, which would be running at port 25, just like port 80 for web server. Usually SMTP servers are running on port 25. So they will try to connect or open TCP connection with John's email server. Remember, that's why when you send wrong email address, let's suppose john@abcd.com, and that abc.com server does not have any SMTP mail server, that's why you can get error, okay, this user does not exist, right? So, but most of the time might be that abcd.com do exist as a mail server, and that John user does not exist on that mail server, so both could happen, okay? So in the fourth step, SMTP client sends Ashling's message over the TCP connection to John's mail server, this fourth one, right? And it will place, obviously, John's mail server places the message in John's mailbox. So even he can check after 2 days, 10 days, it doesn't matter, because it's permanently stored in a mailbox of John, okay? That's why you can get your email even that user is not online or something, okay? And then after some time, after a few days, or even after some years or months, John can invoke his user agent to read messages. Then it will simply get all the messages that are placed in John's mail server, okay? So it's very easy, right? So basically we have another protocol, and I have told you that protocol is nothing, just few keywords, but obviously meanings of that keywords to both parties are very cleared. When I say delete file name, other server will know that, okay, I have to delete this file. Simple as that, okay? Protocol is just simple exchanging of some already defined keywords. Okay, so the common difference between HTTP is that HTTP is basically in HTTP client is pulling data. Okay, so but in SMTP client is pushing data. So client requesting in HTTP for some data, that's why it's pull data, right? But in SMTP client is pushing some data because they are composing, he or she is composing some email and they are pushing some data to the mail server. And obviously both use ASCII code or response interaction, status codes are same, right? And different things are there. In HTTP mostly connection is non-persistent, but for SMTP multiple objects can be sent in one multi-part message, which means that SMTP uses persistent connections. Okay, so because if you are attaching some file in your email, then it would be added as a multiple objects and only one connection would be open. Can anyone tell why connection is persistent in SMTP but not for HTTP in most cases. In HTTP can be persistent, but for communicating between mail servers, connections are persistent. Any idea why? So in the first lecture, we discussed different characteristics of the internet, right? There were 6-7 points. So today, when you go back to your home or something, right, then do revise these 6-7 things, like why we are using internet, what are the characteristics of the internet. And obviously one of the thing was scalability, because millions of users are using HTTP to connect to the web servers, but obviously there wouldn't be millions of web servers or mail servers would be communicating with each other. So they can open persistent connections, right? So main scalability is the main thing, because there are so many HTTP users, but there are very few SMTP servers that are communicating with each other, okay? Hundreds or thousands only, okay? But 2 billion people are communicating. So for 2 billion people communicating over HTTP, opening up persistent connection is more expensive, okay? But opening a persistent connection for SMTP transfer, SMTP mail servers communication is not that much expensive, okay? So scalability is one of the issue. And obviously authentication and all the stuff is also there. So retrieving email is very easy. For sending, we use SMTP, but if this person, let's suppose John, if they want to retrieve his email from the server, then he will be using IMAP protocol, Internet Mail Access Protocol, okay? So it will simply tell how to get messages from the server. So they can delete messages, or even they can delete folders. So we make connection with HTML or Hotmail or Yahoo Mail by using HTTP, but then it's basically a web-based interface on top of SMTP. At the backend for SMTP and to send messages, but POP or IMAP protocols would be using for email messages. Any question about email servers? They are just like web servers, but they are using different protocol named as SMTP, okay? And they are just storing your messages, or they are just forwarding your messages to other mail servers. And obviously when they send someone's email to the other email server, then it's their responsibility to store in their particular mailbox. You cannot access your email by using Gmail. Your Gmail account cannot be accessed through NUI Galway mail server, okay? They are only responsible for all the users who have accounts on NUI Galway SMTP mail server, okay? So we will discuss DNS. So DNS is domain name system, and we discussed this thing, so I will quickly go through this thing, that when I am typing facebook.com, how I will know what is the IP address of facebook.com, okay? Because facebook.com is just an alias or some sort of nickname of some particular IP address, because this computer can only works with numbers. They don't know what is facebook.com, okay? So, but it's for human readability and accessibility thing, it's very difficult for us to remember each and every IP address of all the websites that we want to serve. If I want to serve bbc.com, it's very easy to remember, okay, I just have to type bbc.com instead of remembering IP address of BBC, for example, 202.22.32.130. Obviously, it's quite difficult, okay? And So for this purpose, we would be using domain name system. So whenever we are requesting some website browser via browser or something else, so basically we have local DNS systems. Usually we have, or we can connect to some global DNS systems, okay, to get simple IP address. So it's a simple database of mapping for every domain name. They know that, okay, what is the IP address of facebook.com, and how they know that facebook.com server would be sharing that information to that DNS servers over the time, okay. Might be weekly basis, might be monthly basis, if their IP addresses are keep changing. And just remember that because of network security, there are so many attacks on networks, and these big companies keep changing their IP addresses, okay. Otherwise their service could be hacked, or denial of service thing, okay. Do you know what is denial of service attack? DOS attacks. Can anyone know? DOS attacks, denial of service attacks. We will discuss this thing even in DNS as well. But denial of service attack, what could be the denial of service attack? Like if students are not happy with some government institution, what they can do? In terms of physical, might be they can protest in front of their main door, denial of service, no one can go out, right? Other could be, like for example, all of the students keep calling dean of your department. So denial of service, his mobile phone cannot receive important calls, right? Don't do this, but it's a denial of service, right? So keep calling admin of NUIGP admin so that they cannot work. Obviously they cannot use phone because thousands of people are calling them, right? So this is denial of service. So in DNS we do have this sort of thing. We will discuss in the next few slides. So basically internet, we have discussed this thing, that IP addresses, and we have to know the IP address of nuigalway.ie, right? So domain name system will do this thing. It's a distributed database implementing in hierarchy of many name servers, okay? And it's an application layer protocol, and different DNS servers communicate with each other to share that information. So services is important. Services host name to IP address translation. This is the main service of DNS. Any DNS server should translate your host name, which is facebook.com, it could be anything, right, to IP address, or some other aliasing or mail server aliasing, right? And load distribution is as well there. Obviously we cannot make one centralized DNS, otherwise single point of failure. If there is only one DNS working all over the world, all the requests would go there, and obviously single point of failure is there. That's why it's distributed. And obviously traffic volume, distance, centralized database, maintenance problem. So we have different root DNS servers, and every root DNS servers, then we have different .com DNS servers. They will only manage all .com domains, right? Same is the case with .ie DNS servers, .org, what else? .edu, right? .net is another thing, right? So they are top level domains. Then obviously they would be divided into yahoo.com, amazon.com, dcu.ie, and nuigalway.ie, right? They are authoritative domain servers, okay? And they would be sharing information with each other. That's why this would know that, okay, what is the IP address of nuigalway, okay? So client wants IP address for amazon.com, then obviously because of .com thing, it will know, okay, I have to ask this question from this .com DNS server, okay? So client queries root server to find .com DNS server. Client queries .com DNS server to get Amazon.com DNS server. And then obviously this Amazon.com DNS server to get IP address for Amazon.com. But obviously this is a long process. If every time at NUIG you are searching Amazon.com, surfing Amazon.com, and you have to query so many times and every user have to query, no. What this proxy server will do, or we can say local DNS server will do, they will store this information locally as well once it was asked by some client. Okay, so next time it will not go by this way, root and then DNS thing. It will check locally in NUI's network that what is the IP address of Amazon.com. And again, when we are caching something, when we are storing something, some data locally, it would have some life. We have to update it, right? We have to make some policy of updation. Might be it's a daily update at midnight or sometime when we know that, okay, there are only few people who would be using our internet at 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. let's suppose. Okay. So we have to install local DNS system. So yeah, one company or one organization is controlling this thing, and there are 13 logical root name servers available all over the world. And but these root servers are distributed, copied multiple times, right, and replicated many times. So you can see even DNS in US alone, there are around 200 DNS root servers are there, out like copies of these 13 root name servers. Okay, so these are the top level domain servers, and then we have authoritative DNS servers. So DNS name resolution could be it could be iterated query. For example, if someone is requesting from here, so it will ask local DNS server. Okay, and then it will ask root DNS server, then it will tell, okay, you need this one .edu thing, so you have to connect this person, right? And then it will tell this, this and this. Okay, so by this way information will go about the IP address of this machine. But once IP address of this machine is known, then this locally would be available for next usage. Okay, otherwise there would be a lot of traffic between root DNS and TLD top level domain name servers. Other thing could be recursive query. Recursive query could be something like this. So we are getting from root, you are putting burden on root, right? And it will ask from this, this, and it will send back this thing. So usually this sort of DNS name resolution is not a good solution. So you can cache DNS information locally, and obviously it will save a lot of time. So DNS security is very important because there are distributed denial of service attacks. Because if I want to, let's suppose if I want to down internet for the whole world, what I have to do is I have to attack root DNS server, right? If that root DNS servers all over the world are somehow compromised, then obviously no one can communicate with each other, right? No one knows what is the IP address of other machines. Okay, and denial of service is that what I will do, I will create a program and I can simply open 10,000 connections from this computer to the root thing, very similar to the call phone that I was saying, that keep calling someone, and if 10,000 people are calling someone, his or her phone is technically no use because 10,000 random people would be calling him, right? So this is denial of service attack. And there are some strategies we will discuss in this course how to avoid denial of service attacks. Distributed denial of service attack is that someone sitting in China, in Russia, in Pakistan, all of them are in one group and they are sending some data and they are attacking someone machines, some root servers in US or in Europe, right? So it is possible and it's very easy. But obviously it has some consequences. So, or other thing could be spoofing attacks. They are very interesting attacks. For example, if all of you are trying to connect to some DNS server and this machine is saying, I am a DNS server. What you will do? Remember, in networks, all the companies, all the ISPs, all the algorithms are based on greedy algorithms, okay? Greedy algorithms, because mostly algorithms are greedy, because I know that if my request is going to these 10 computers, I have to pay some money to all of these 10 links because I'm using your services, right? But if the same service is providing by this laptop, it is agreed. I know that, okay, I only have to pay this person only. So all the infrastructure of network is based on greedy sort of thing, greedy algorithms, that you have to save cost, and cost is like how many hops you are sending your data, because for every hop you are pay to each link of that hops, right? So spoofing attacks are very interesting, because if I tell you I am a DNS server and UI Galway will not ask to the root and all the stuff, they will say, okay, this machine is sitting here and it's very close and we don't have to pay much to this machine. Okay, I accept this is a DNS server. But you will ask Facebook, IP address of Facebook, I will give you IP address of Gmail. Okay, so this is spoofing attacks. So for example, if I have one phishing attack, I want some sort of phishing attack, or I want to hack your debit or credit card information, I will portray you as a Visa or MasterCard website, and I will send you IP address, not of actual MasterCard website, but fake one, IP address of fake, right? So it could happen. Spoofing attacks are very easy, and people can intercept DNS queries. So even it's very easy, like might be, I don't know, you know that or no, but it's quite old, might be you heard. It's around like 5 or 6 years ago, YouTube was down all over the world. So what was the main issue was that there was one guy in Pakistan. What he did is that they represent as a DNS of YouTube, and he said, okay, I can go through your data for YouTube and it's very fast, okay? But it was just dead end. That IP address was not related to YouTube. Obviously then everyone was requesting to that IP address, and dead end. And if dead end, it means that no one can access YouTube, right? So obviously if at particular IP address, if that thing is not running, then it's a failure of service. So this is DNS security. We will talk about this thing in more detail when we will be discussing security issues in networks. And just remember that networks are shared, resources are shared, data is shared. You are sending your data on shared resources. Anyone can read if it's not encrypted, right? And anyone can mislead your data that this path is very shortcut to US Gmail server, okay? Anyone can. But there are some algorithms, there are some check and balance thing, so that this sort of bogus replies, right, they could be avoided. So last thing of this lecture is video streaming. It's very easy. All of you are using YouTube, watching YouTube videos, or even if it's in terms of streaming, a very good example is Netflix, right? So we will see what is, first of all, streaming video traffic. Obviously, it's a major consumer of internet bandwidth. Like in 2020 analysis, it's based on US traffic, but it's true all over the world that 80% of residential ISP traffic is for Amazon Prime or YouTube or Netflix. 80% of the traffic, okay, internet traffic. So you can imagine how much video streaming data is going on over the internet. Challenge is that obviously if we have 1 billion users, then what if we have 2 billion users, right? For same infrastructure, it would be quite challenging. Another challenge obviously is heterogeneity, because different users have different capabilities. Like if I am watching some Netflix drama on my mobile, obviously my mobile or my smartphone wouldn't have much capacity as compared to this laptop, okay? Or my internet connection could be very slow. I would be in some remote area on the mountains, right? So this is a big challenge, that how you can stream your data, right? But they are reachable to all users having different hardware, having different bandwidth capacity, right? So solution is that distributed application level infrastructure. So that's why we are discussing this thing, because at application level, we can control different things, okay? So, so you know that, right? For video, there is some, if I want to make video, obviously I have to sequence images 24 or more, 30 usually images per second, right? Then it will, like all the videos are just a combination of images, okay? So if I show you one image, 24 images per second, speed would be this like, right? I keep changing 24 images per second, then it will look like a video for you. Otherwise, it's an image, okay? And in our childhood, we have done this thing that on a book, we can write something, notebook, and we can flip pages quickly and it will animate some sort of thing, right? So video is just like this. So, but imagine if there is a video of 10 minutes and one image is, let's suppose, taking 1 MB only, right? It means that for 1 second of video, you need 24 images, which is 24 MB data, right? And you can multiply this 24 MB with 60 seconds for 1 minute, and then 10 minutes into 10, and you can see it's huge. It could go to in GBs, right? For only 10-minute videos. But obviously, what they do is that they compress videos, right? They compress videos. Compression is that they encode images, so in different formats. So for example, this image, every image is 1 pixel, right? So each pixel represented by bits, 8 bits. So in compression, they will only note what is the change of this frame to this frame, okay? Because you can see, even if this person is running in this video, for example, this color is same in this frame as well, right? So in compression, they will only say, okay, this pixel would change after 20 seconds to this color, okay? So by this way, they are compressing information. They are not sending 24 pure JPEG images per second to the user. It's compression. And this compression techniques are different video, multimedia encoding techniques. That's why we have different AVI format, MPEG format, these are compression algorithms. Okay, how we will compress images. So okay, I have discussed this thing. We can go through. So similarly, for compression, obviously we have to encode. We can encode by constant bit rate, or it could be variable, right? So for example, if we want to store some videos on CD-ROM, then this compression would work fine, MPEG-1. But usually for the internet, we use this format of compression, MPEG-4, okay? So main challenges of scenario for this streaming stored video is that, do you know streaming, what is streaming, right? Like I'm playing one video here, and for example, you are connected to my computer somehow, or you are a Netflix user, I am a Netflix provider. So this video will run here, and similarly, simultaneously, you can watch this video on your computers, okay? This is streaming. YouTube videos are not streamed videos, they are already stored videos, okay? But you can do live streaming as well. So that's why they use different terminology, live streaming. Streaming is that server is playing some video and you are watching this video, okay? This is streaming. So main challenge is that obviously the server to client bandwidth is vary over time. Might be this sort of, they have very good connection, and here we don't have a very good connection. But if I am streaming something, I should ensure that all the data or videos should be transferred to these computers as well to this computer as well, right? So what we can do, if I want to, let's suppose streaming, you can see I'm streaming one video on this screen, and people sitting very near, they can easily watch, but people who are sitting very far, they have poor connection, let's suppose, they cannot watch. And obviously they cannot say me that, okay, stop here and go back to previous screen, all right? So this is a challenge of streaming video, that you have to provide service to all users irrespective of their bandwidth capacity. So what we can do? Can anyone guess? How to stream data so that all users having limited bandwidth or very rich bandwidth having, both can see that video. How is it possible?
Less pixels.
Sorry?
Have less quality, less pixels.
Yeah, it's a good solution. Let's suppose I say 400 pixels or frames per second, but they have very good connection. They can watch videos in HD. Why I am sending data in low pixels, right? This is a good solution that, okay, you can see, okay, out of 100 users, what is the minimum bandwidth they can, that would be okay. And I can stream video in low resolution. But if some user has very good bandwidth, then what's his or her fault to watch low pixel videos instead of HD, right? But it's a good solution, very near, in the right direction. Any other guess? Can you mix web cache with his solution? Local copies of different resolution. If he can watch in HD, give him in HD. If this machine can watch in only 1000 pixels frame rate, send another copy of that 1000 pixels, right? So this is the solution of this streaming. Netflix is doing the same thing, that they are generating videos of different formats. They are putting these formats in different local or closer servers, not on the main servers, but they are streaming to different spreaded distributed servers. And then when client is connected to Netflix, they will estimate, they will send one file known as manifest file, and that manifest file would contain, okay, if your capacity is this one, ask this smaller server. If this your capacity is bigger, then ask for HD version for this server. Okay, so by this way Netflix and even this streaming thing is working on. And because if we are streaming something and this data is streaming at the same speed, right? For streaming, it's a condition that you have to stream, you have to send and receive data at the same speed. It is not possible, and obviously it's not a good idea that when one movie is playing and it's very slow motion playing at the client end. No. Okay, so that's why same rate, 30 frames per second, if it's recorded in 30 frames per second. So idea is very simple, and obviously at the client side they use buffering, they use buffer, right? So they keep storing data and playing at the same rate. Okay, so buffer is used at the client side so that there is no jitter in the video because of this buffering thing. So this mechanism that I discussed, how Netflix is working, is known as DASH, Dynamic Adaptive Streaming over HTTP. So basically server divides video file into multiple chunks, each chunk encoded at multiple different rates, HD format, SD format, or more shorter formats, right? And then different rate encoding stored in different files, different servers, files replicated in various CDN nodes, and this manifest file provides URLs for different chunks. Okay, so whenever client is connected to Netflix or asking some file or some video to streaming to watch, Netflix will share that manifest file. Okay, this is a file according to your capability, your application, because at client side Netflix application is running, right? So they will see, okay, this bandwidth is not good, so this sort of encoding is located at this URL, so it will stream that URL. Okay, so yeah, this is, we have talked about this thing. So streaming video is just encoding, dash, and play out buffering. Okay, buffering at the local host, so that if you get more data, they can buffer it, so that client application can maintain same speed. Okay, so any question? So this is a picture. For example, if you are asking, this is a Netflix server, right? And if you are asking Mad Men, for example, so they are the different servers which have multiple copies of Netflix in different formats. Okay, Mad Men, let's suppose this is HD, this is SD, this is for mobile phones, this is for low bandwidth, different servers for different formats, right? And one from this home, if this is the request for streaming of this video, definitely firstly we will connect to Netflix for authentication, for pricing and costing and all the stuff. So subscriber requests contents, service provider returns manifest file. Okay, So it will ask this thing, it will return manifest file to the client, and then accordingly it will get data from here in the same format that could be transferred on this bandwidth by using the connection. Okay. Okay, we can stop here.